In the days that followed, the press was filled with news of the revolution that had taken place in the kingdom. Newspapers reported on how the new president was negotiating with the country's most respected men to transform the nation into a republic with its own parliament. Details were being finalized about the president's powers, the length and process of their election, and countless other matters, both significant and minor. As Edward had anticipated, Nicolette had retreated to the royal summer residence. He sent the captain of the guard to bring her back, but she refused to return to the capital. This didn't surprise Edward. It took a few days before he was free enough to go to see her. The former queen was even more distant and colder than he had expected. Out of politeness, she couldn't be openly dismissive. She was well aware that the roles had reversed and who now held power. They met in the garden, where Nicolette gave a slight curtsy, barely meeting his eyes. Instead, she pretended to inspect the flowers and quickly moved to practical matters. "I would like to live in seclusion in this house," she informed him. "Legally, it's part of my dowry, and what belongs to my sisters and me is safely stored in a bank. I've informed my sisters not to return to the palace after their visit to La Rochelle. If you could have the rest of our clothes and personal belongings sent here, I'd appreciate it. I hope you'll respect my decision. I have no intention of interfering with you, but I'd like to live here quietly, away from people." Edward cleared his throat. "I didn't come to discuss property, Miss Nicolette, but marriage. I assume you still have several advisors at the palace, unless you've dismissed them," Nicolette replied. "I'm sure they'd be happy to offer you valuable life advice and help you find a suitable wife. Could we sit in that gazebo over there?" Edward gestured toward the sprawling structure that was the garden's centerpiece. Nicolette shook her head. "There's a wasp nest in there. No one's removed it yet." "So, you've already found the torture chamber," Edward quipped. He knew it wasn't a particularly good joke, but he was trying to break the ice. It seemed to work, as Nicolette briefly met his gaze. "You know, I have the pattern of the palace study's parquet floor etched in my memory," Edward said gently. "One of the worst moments in recent weeks was when I knelt before you in that room. It was the first time we'd spoken since I learned who you were. I felt foolish. I dared to think of the Queen and even hinted at it. I didn't know how to act around you. I felt the vast gap between us, and I was unbelievably nervous. I almost knocked over the little table, feeling awkwardly and truly clumsy. I had no clue how to talk to you. And you didn't exactly make it easy at first." Nicolette was still looking at the flowers, but she stole occasional glances at him. It was clear she was relaxing slightly. "When you offered me the chance to escape through the window, I found it slightly amusing," Edward continued. "A bit impractical, but very human. It was one of the things that finally helped me feel at ease in your presence. And I don't even need to mention how humiliating it was to stand stripped at the pillory. I know what it's like to feel degraded." Nicolette now met his eyes but still said nothing. "I understand this must feel like a reversal of roles, and you might find it humiliating," Edward explained. "Because of how I felt in front of you before, I can imagine what's going through your mind. For me, this new position is, among other things, an opportunity to bridge the social gap between us and offer you something. I don't know if you've read that this position is planned for 5 years, with the possibility of one extension. For me, those are years to save up, to think about what I could do next, maybe start a school or a small manufacture. I'm considering something that would be fulfilling and provide for my future family with dignity." "What about your preaching plans?" Nicolette asked. "God showed me that the time for that will come later in my life. Until then, I'd like to focus on something else, and I don't think I'd return to academia after politics," Edward replied. Nicolette studied him but said nothing more. "Can we sit somewhere and talk?" Edward asked again. "I don't think there's anything for the two of us to talk about," Nicolette insisted stubbornly, but Edward sensed it was only provocation. She was testing him. He looked at her intently. "I hate to say this, and I don't want to be overbearing, but I've been appointed your guardian," he warned. "You won't get rid of me that easily." Nicolette swallowed and gave him a fleeting, timid glance. Edward returned her look calmly, making it clear he wouldn't be brushed off. She sighed and muttered, "There's a bench on the beach. They walked to the beach in silence and sat down. Edward swallowed when he saw the place. It was the beach from his old vision. He decided to keep that to himself for now. It was encouraging, though, to see a place tied to God's revelation of his future, despite Nicolette's standoffish demeanor. He was still reeling from how his punishment had been lifted at the last moment and where his life was headed. If he'd ever doubted, even for a moment at the pillory, he was now absolutely certain that whatever God promised would come to pass. "You know, aside from the fact that I truly care for you," he said to Nicolette, "I think it would be very advantageous for both of us to be together. You'd be safer from any overly zealous opponents of the monarchy, and it would help me navigate the local nobility better. I would be more socially acceptable to them. I can see that some of them resent my position. Honestly, sometimes I don't even know how to act properly. And a 20-year-old incapable girl is supposed to help with that?" Nicolette retorted. "Did my speech offend you?" Edward asked. "The word incapable was never applied to you, but you are 20, and I honestly think the burden of running an entire country should fall to someone far more experienced. I didn't steal your place, and I'm sorry if you feel that way. It was the will of the people and the pressure of the times. But for myself, I see it as trying to move a heavy stone in your place. When you're 10, you feel grown up, but at 20, you realize how childish you were. At 30, you see how you were only starting to figure things out at 20. That's why there's talk of an age limit for future presidents. I'm an exception because of how things unfolded. The minimum age will likely be 35 or 40, it's still under discussion." "I'm not arguing with you about this," Nicolette said quietly. "But I can't imagine standing by your side. How would that look? Here comes the president and his wife," the deposed, inadequate, publicly rejected Nicolette Sandcreek. "Thank you very much, but I'm not interested." "Nicolette, I hate to say this," Edward explained gently, "but you're seeing far too much of yourself in all of this. Nothing that happened was a personal attack against you. People, influenced by the French Revolution, simply began to see a republic as a better form of government than a monarchy, and on that point, I agree with them. I think that if you weren't personally affected, you might even wish such a change upon this country. You have much to be grateful for. The coup unfolded so miraculously that you survived it, and that's no small thing. Perhaps that's why God led both of us to help the rector. Because if it had been him standing there in the midst of the coup instead of me, things might have turned out far worse for you. Do you realize that? It's easy for you to say, when you're not in my place." Nicolette frowned, though she knew it wasn't quite fair. She was well aware that not even prison had truly shaken Edward. "Self-pity is a double-edged sword, Nicolette," Edward replied. "You can swing it around, but you'll mostly hurt yourself. It's like showing up to a feast, sweeping all the food off the table in a huff, and walking away. Sure, you'll offend the hosts and hurt them, but you're the one who leaves hungry and might even cut your hand on the broken dishes. I'm not downplaying how hard this is for you, but I'm offering to help you through it. There are many ways to face this: honesty, humor, but I don't think anyone would dare say anything to you. Want to know what helps me?" Nicolette shrugged and murmured, "Having a purpose and a mission," Edward continued. "Imagine, 60 years from now, standing before Jesus, and he asks how you lived your life. You would say, people wronged me by taking my rightful position, and I spent my life making sure they never forgot it. I turned bitter, rejected every marriage proposal, and stayed alone to show how hurt I was. I resented everyone and spread my misery, wanting others to feel as miserable as I did." Edward leaned forward, looking at her intently. "Or will you come to see that life is so much more than your circumstances, and ask God what your purpose and calling should be? With that vision, knowing who you are and where you're headed, you'd move toward your goal. When you have a purpose, you're not so easily hurt. You won't let every humiliating remark or frown knock you down. Your life won't be defined by whether someone smiles or frowns at you, whether they happen to applaud you or look down on you. You'll look past those who mock you, figuratively speaking, toward the goal on the horizon, and you won't let them trip you up." "And who am I?" Nicolette asked softly. "Everything I was raised for has fallen apart." Edward sighed. "What you were in this fleeting earthly kingdom may well have fallen apart, But I thought it would matter to you that you belong to the kingdom of the one who is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. God created us in His image, and even though all of that was lost for a time in Adam, Jesus made it possible for us to return to that original design and truly become God's image again. God is love, and we can be renewed and transformed in such a way that our lives reflect His qualities, wherever we are. In prison, on a throne, at a university, or in a fishing boat. When you are filled with Him, you won't need reassurance from people, you will know who you are. You won't be vulnerable to circumstances, to people, or to what happens around you. You will be fulfilled, your gaze lifted heavenward instead of fixed on yourself, and you'll move towards your victorious purpose. Even if you had remained queen, that reign too would have ended one day, and all that would remain would be who you had become and the spiritual legacy you would have left. I know it's a radical shift for you to lose all the attention you were used to, but all of that is just glitter that lasts only for a while. Your identity will be shaped either by the glitter of circumstances, or its absence, or by who you are in Christ. Today, I may be at the center of attention, but 40 years from now, many may not even remember my name. There are only a few people who can enjoy the applause of the crowds. But every person can be a blessing to those around them. A farmer's wife whom no one knows and who has no influence over the course of this land is still, for a few people, the most important person in the world. And you are important to me, Nicolette, and I wish you wouldn't resist that. That you would take off the chainmail you've wrapped around your heart. Nicolette looked uneasy. She realized Edward was right, but didn't know how to admit it, so she asked jokingly, "Have you ever tried this at a graveyard?" "Tried what?" Edward asked. "A speech like that," she said. "According to the Bible, even the dead were often raised to life by the power of God, and I wonder if you could talk one of them back to life, making them feel so guilty and foolish they'd climb out of their grave to do something." "And did I manage to persuade you?" Edward asked carefully. "You probably won't find out if you just keep sitting here like this," Nicolette replied. "I'd still like to see you on your knees one more time, Mr. President, you know, third time's the charm." "Fourth," Edward corrected, standing from the bench. "It's always been an unforgettable experience, so I remember it a bit better than you." Edward knelt before Nicolette, pulling a ring from his pocket. He held it, looking at her thoughtfully. "I'd be truly honored if you'd become my wife," he said. "It would mean so much to me. You know," he hesitated, "I'd love to say something profound and unforgettable, but I have to admit, I'm drawing a blank right now." "No one's asking you to write a new book here," Nicolette pointed out. "You just had to ask a fairly simple question." "It felt too plain," Edward said sheepishly. "I wanted to say something worthy of you, Nicolette. I know your name holds the Greek word for victory, and I'd love for us to reach that victorious end together. I want to assure you that, even though it feels like you've lost something now, I believe there's a far more lasting victory we can strive for together. Will you do me the honor?" "Yes," Nicolette nodded, smiling and extending her hand. "What else can I do?" she added as he slipped the ring on her finger. "You really could talk a corpse into doing exactly what you want." Edward smiled. God clearly knew I'd need that eloquence for a lot of things in life. He stood, pulled her close, and winked. "I wanted to know what it's like to hold a girl who isn't wearing armor." And with that, he leaned down to kiss her.